October 26th, 1955. On a soundstage at Warner Brothers, a young actor stood under the hot lights wearing something that would change men's fashion forever. The bright red windbreaker wasn't just a costume choice. It was a declaration of war against everything American men were supposed to wear. Within months, that jacket would become the most copied piece of clothing in the world. Within decades, it would still be influencing what men wear every single day. James Dean didn't just act in movies. He rewrote the entire rulebook of how men could dress, transforming fashion from rigid conformity into personal rebellion. Before Dean, men's style was about fitting in. After Dean, it was about standing out. This is the story of how a troubled kid from Indiana became the godfather of modern menswear, and how one red jacket changed everything. To understand Dean's revolution, you have to understand the suffocating uniformity of 1950s men's fashion. American men dressed like they were going to a funeral every single day. The standard uniform was inflexible. Dark suits, white shirts, narrow ties, fedora hats, and wingtip shoes. Even casual wear meant pressed khakis and button-down Oxford shirts. Color was suspect. Anything remotely expressive was considered effeminate or rebellious. The message was clear. Real men wore uniforms. Real men conformed. Real men disappeared into the crowd. Your father's generation had fought a war, and they came home to a society that demanded they dress like soldiers of capitalism. Identical, interchangeable, safe. Young men suffocated under these rules. They felt the constraints, but had no alternative. Hollywood reinforced this prison. Leading men like Cary Grant, Gregory Peck, and Gary Cooper wore impeccable suits both on screen and off. Even when they played cowboys or adventurers, they looked polished, controlled, perfect. Masculinity meant restraint. Style meant conformity. Then James Dean walked onto a movie set wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and everything shattered. James Byron Dean arrived in Hollywood in 1951 with exactly nothing. No connections, no money, and definitely no designer wardrobe. What he had was a gut-level understanding that clothes could be armor, identity, and rebellion all at once. Growing up in small-town Indiana after his mother's death, Dean learned early that standing out came with consequences. But standing out was also the only way to survive. In New York, studying at the Actors Studio, Dean developed his signature look almost accidentally. He was broke, so he wore what he could afford. T-shirts, jeans, work boots, leather jackets from thrift stores. But Dean wore these working-class staples differently than anyone else. He understood something revolutionary. Clothes weren't just about covering your body. They were about revealing who you were inside. Dean wore his clothes like a second skin. The t-shirts were tight enough to show his lean, muscular frame. The jeans hung low on his hips, cuffed at the bottom, always slightly worn. The leather jacket became his shield against the world. But it was the way he wore these pieces that mattered. The slouch, the hands shoved deep in pockets, the collar turned up against an invisible wind. Dean made clothing a statement of emotional truth. His mentors were horrified. Elia Kazan, directing him in East of Eden, tried to get Dean to dress more professionally on set. Dean refused. He showed up in his t-shirts and jeans, claiming he needed to feel like Cal Trask, his tortured character. But the truth was simpler. Dean had discovered that dressing like himself made him more powerful, more authentic, more dangerous. Before James Dean, the white t-shirt was underwear. That's not metaphorical. It was literally an undergarment that men wore beneath their dress shirts. Showing your t-shirt in public was like showing your boxers. It was working class, it was crude, it was inappropriate. Dean made it iconic. In East of Eden, released in April 1955, Dean appeared in scene after scene wearing just a white t-shirt and jeans. His lean frame, barely contained by the thin cotton fabric, became an image of vulnerable masculinity. The t-shirt showed everything: the tension in his shoulders, the rapid breathing of his emotional intensity, the physical reality of a young man barely holding himself together. The studio executives were nervous. This wasn't how leading men dressed. But Kazan understood what Dean was doing. The t-shirt made Kal Trask more real, more accessible, more heartbreaking. You could see him suffering. The formal clothing of 1950s cinema had always created distance between actors and audiences. Dean's t-shirt destroyed that distance. Then, Rebel Without a Cause arrived in theaters just weeks after Dean's death. And the t-shirt became a uniform of youth rebellion. In the film's most famous sequence, Dean wears a plain white t-shirt during the Chickie Run, the deadly game where he and his rival race stolen cars toward a cliff. If you want more untold stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Your support means everything to us. The t-shirt, simple and white, made Dean look simultaneously vulnerable and defiant. It became the image of teenage angst. Within months, every young man in America wanted a white t-shirt. Manufacturers couldn't keep them in stock. What had been underwear became outerwear. What had been shameful became cool. Dean had single-handedly transformed the most basic piece of clothing into a statement of identity. Dean did the same thing for jeans. Before the 1950s, denim was workwear, what farmers, miners, and manual laborers wore. It was rough, practical, unsexy. Movie stars didn't wear jeans unless they were playing cowboys, and even then the jeans were usually pristine, decorated, theatrical. Dean wore his jeans like they were part of his body. Levi's 501s, worn in, slightly torn, sitting low on his narrow hips. He rolled them at the cuffs, showing his boots or loafers. He understood that jeans weren't just practical, they were sensual. The way denim moved with your body, broke in to fit you perfectly, showed your physical form without being overtly sexual. In Giant, filming in the brutal Texas heat of 1955, Dean wore jeans constantly. He played Jet Rink, a poor ranch hand who strikes oil and becomes wealthy, and Dean used clothing to show the character's journey. At the beginning, his jeans are dusty, worn, authentic. Later, when Jet becomes rich, he wears expensive Western suits. But he never looks comfortable. The jeans were his truth. The suits were his costume. Dean understood something that fashion designers wouldn't articulate for decades. Denim represented authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. In the conformist 1950s, when men wore suits to show they belonged, jeans said the opposite. Jeans said you worked with your hands. Jeans said you didn't give a damn about impressing anyone. Jeans said you were real. After Dean's death, jean sales among young men exploded. Levi Strauss & Company saw a dramatic shift in their customer base. Suddenly, wealthy suburban kids wanted to dress like ranch hands. The company, which had been marketing work pants, suddenly found themselves in the fashion business. They had James Dean to thank. The leather jacket becomes an icon. If the t-shirt was Dean's vulnerability and jeans were his authenticity, the leather jacket was his armor. Dean owned several leather jackets. but his favorite was a simple brown motorcycle jacket he'd bought secondhand in New York. It was scuffed, broken in, molded to his frame from constant wear. The leather jacket already had cultural associations. Bikers wore them, greasers wore them, outcasts wore them. But they were considered dangerous, lower class, threatening. No Hollywood leading man would be caught dead in a leather jacket off screen. Dean wore his everywhere, to premieres, to meetings with studio executives, to the grocery store. He wore it like a shield against the phoniness of Hollywood. A reminder that he came from somewhere real, that he couldn't be polished into submission. The leather jacket said, "I'm dangerous. I don't play by your rules. Try to change me and see what happens." The jacket took on almost mythical status after Dean's death. Photographers had captured him wearing it hundreds of times, leaning against his Porsche, walking through New York, standing on movie sets. In every image, the jacket made him look simultaneously vulnerable and untouchable, young and timeless. Within a year of his death, every major clothing manufacturer was producing leather jackets. Schott NYC, the company that made the original motorcycle jacket, saw sales increase by 400%. The leather jacket became the uniform of rebels, rockers, and anyone who wanted to telegraph that they didn't fit into straight society. Decades later, everyone from Bruce Springsteen to the Ramones to David Beckham would wear leather jackets that directly descended from Dean's aesthetic. The basic design remained unchanged because Dean had perfected it. Simple, functional, slightly dangerous. The leather jacket became timeless because Dean made it transcend fashion and become identity. But the single most influential piece of clothing James Dean ever wore was the bright red windbreaker in Rebel Without a Cause. That jacket rewrote the rules of what color could mean in menswear. Director Nicholas Ray chose the red jacket deliberately. In the black and white world of 1950s conformity, he wanted Jim Stark, Dean's character, to be a flash of color, a warning signal, a stop sign that society couldn't ignore. The red was aggressive, attention-seeking, impossible to miss. It was everything a young man in 1955 wasn't supposed to be. Dean wore the jacket in the film's most crucial scenes. When Jim Stark first arrives at the police station, the red jacket makes him visible, marked, different from everyone in their neutral colors. During the Chickie run, the red jacket is what you see as Dean's car races toward the cliff. A bright streak of color heading toward death. In the scene where Jim tries desperately to connect with his father, the red jacket represents everything his father can't understand about his son's pain. The red windbreaker wasn't just clothing. It was a character. It represented youth rebellion, emotional intensity, the desperate need to be seen and understood. When Warner Brothers' costume department first presented the jacket, some executives worried it was too bold, too flashy, too feminine. That was exactly the point. Dean was challenging every assumption about what masculinity could look like. The jacket's impact was immediate and overwhelming. Rebel Without a Cause premiered on October 27, 1955, exactly 1 month after Dean's death. Audiences saw the red jacket as Dean's ghost, a final statement from an actor who had died too young. The jacket represented everything Dean had fought for: the right to feel deeply, to dress boldly, to refuse to disappear into conformity. Department stores were flooded with requests for red windbreakers. Manufacturers rushed to produce them. McGregor Sportswear, which had supplied the original jacket for the film, couldn't keep up with demand. Young men across America wanted to wrap themselves in that same defiant color. But more importantly, the red jacket broke a fundamental rule of menswear. Men could wear bright colors. They could be visible. They could use fashion to express emotion. Before Dean, vibrant colors in menswear were considered effeminate or inappropriate. After the red jacket, color became a tool of rebellion, self-expression, power. What made Dean's fashion revolution so powerful was that he created a complete aesthetic system. It wasn't just about individual pieces. It was about how they worked together to create an identity. The Dean look had specific components. The foundation, white t-shirt or plain colored shirt, always fitted to show his lean frame. Never oversized, never loose. The shirt revealed the body underneath without being overtly sexual. The bottoms. Levi's 501 jeans, worn in, sitting low on the hips, cuffed at the ankle. Or in more formal situations, simple dark trousers without pleats or decoration. Dean understood that simplicity in the lower half drew attention to the upper body and face. The outerwear, leather jacket, denim jacket, or the red windbreaker, something with texture, weight, attitude. The outer layer was armor and statement simultaneously. The accessories, minimal. A simple watch, maybe. Sometimes glasses, heavy black frames that made him look intellectual and vulnerable. Never ties, never jewelry, never anything decorative. The point was to look like you'd just thrown on whatever was closest, even though every choice was deliberate. The details. This is where Dean's genius lived. The way he wore the clothes mattered as much as the clothes themselves. Collar popped on the jacket, hands shoved deep in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was protecting himself from the world. One thumb hooked in the belt loop of his jeans, the slouch, the lean, the physical grammar of a young man who refused to stand at attention. Dean understood that fashion was body language made visible. Every generation since has tried to replicate his effortless cool, not realizing that it was never effortless. It was carefully constructed rebellion. Hollywood and the fashion industry didn't know what to do with Dean. He broke every rule they'd carefully constructed. At premieres, while other stars wore tuxedos, Dean showed up in a sports coat and open-collar shirt. At the Academy Awards ceremony for East of Eden, he wore a simple dark suit with no tie, looking uncomfortable and defiant. The fashion press criticized him. They called his style sloppy, juvenile, inappropriate. Newspaper columnists wrote concerned pieces about the decline of standards, blaming Dean for encouraging young men to dress like delinquents. But the criticism only made Dean more popular. Young people saw the attacks for what they were, the old guard desperately trying to maintain control. Every article criticizing Dean's fashion choices made him more attractive to teenagers who felt suffocated by the same rules. Clothing manufacturers faced a crisis. Their entire business model was built on selling suits to men who wanted to fit in. Suddenly, their target demographic wanted to stand out. The industry had two choices: fight the change or profit from it. They chose profit. By 1956, major retailers started carrying casual wear lines specifically marketed to young men. The clothing was essentially Dean's aesthetic, mass-produced and sanitized. White t-shirts were rebranded as sportswear. Jeans were sold as leisure pants. Leather jackets appeared in department stores, marketed as motorcycle-style outerwear to make them sound respectable. These forgotten stories deserve to be told. If you think so too, subscribe and like this video. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. The fashion industry co-opted Dean's rebellion and sold it back to the rebels. This pattern would repeat for decades. Underground style becomes mainstream. Mainstream becomes boring. New rebels create new styles. But it all started with Dean. On September 30th, 1955, James Dean died in a car crash on California Route 466. He was wearing his favorite red jacket, jeans, and a white t-shirt. In his final moments, Dean was dressed exactly as he'd lived, defiantly, authentically, himself. His death froze his image in time. Dean never got old, never sold out, never became establishment. He remained forever 24, forever beautiful, forever dressed in the uniform of youth rebellion. This made his fashion influence even more powerful. He became a ghost you could dress like. In the months after his death, Life magazine published photo spreads of Dean's personal style. Every image showed him in his signature pieces: the t-shirts, the jeans, the leather jackets. These weren't fashion shoots. They were documentation of authenticity. Fans studied the photos like religious texts, trying to decode exactly how to achieve Dean's effortless cool. The tragic irony is that Dean died just as his influence was exploding. Rebel Without a Cause premiered 4 weeks after his death. Giant was released a year later. Audiences saw his final performances while simultaneously mourning his loss. Every piece of clothing he wore on screen became a memorial. Dean's fashion revolution didn't end with the 1950s. It kept echoing, influencing every generation that followed. In the 1960s, Steve McQueen built his entire style on Dean's foundation: t-shirts, jeans, leather jackets, minimal accessories. McQueen understood that Dean had created a template for masculine cool that transcended trends. The 1970s saw Bruce Springsteen adopt Dean's working-class aesthetic: white t-shirts, denim, leather jackets, and use it to telegraph authenticity in an era of glam rock excess. Springsteen even copied Dean's physical postures: the hands in pockets slouch, the wounded vulnerability. In the 1980s, the punk movement stripped Dean's aesthetic down to its essentials: ripped jeans, plain t-shirts, leather jackets covered in spikes. The Ramones, the Clash, the Sex Pistols, all wore variations of Dean's uniform, turning it from rebel chic into full-blown anti-establishment armor. The 1990s grunge movement was pure Dean: thrift store flannel over t-shirts, worn jeans, combat boots. Kurt Cobain, grunge's reluctant icon, dressed almost identically to how Dean dressed 40 years earlier. The only difference was that Cobain's version was even more deliberately anti-fashion, rejecting the designer co-option that had already happened to Dean's style. Even in the 2000s and 2010s, Dean's influence remained everywhere. Every major male celebrity who wanted to project authenticity reached for Dean's playbook. Brad Pitt in jeans and a t-shirt, Ryan Gosling in a plain white shirt and trousers, David Beckham in a perfectly worn leather jacket. The pieces changed slightly, fits got slimmer, fabrics got more technical, but the fundamental message remained Dean's: dress like yourself, not like what society expects. For decades, high fashion designers pretended Dean didn't influence them, admitting that their expensive, carefully crafted collections were inspired by a dead actor's jeans and t-shirts would undermine their mystique. But eventually, they stopped pretending. Hedi Slimane, who revolutionized menswear in the 2000s, openly cited Dean as his primary inspiration. Slimaine's work at Dior Homme and later Saint Laurent was essentially Dean's aesthetic updated for the 21st century. Skinny jeans, slim leather jackets, white t-shirts, all cut close to the body. Slimane understood that Dean had discovered the perfect proportions for expressing vulnerable masculinity through clothing. Tom Ford, Ralph Lauren, Calvin Klein, all eventually created collections that were direct homages to Dean. They showed models in white t-shirts and jeans, leather jackets and boots, looking brooding and beautiful. These weren't tributes. They were admissions that Dean had solved menswear decades before they started designing. The fashion industry finally understood what Dean knew instinctively. Men wanted to dress in ways that made them feel like themselves, not like costumes of who they should be. The revolution, Dean started in the 1950s, became the foundation of all modern menswear. Casual wear, streetwear, athleisure, all descend from Dean's rejection of formal constraints. But Dean's fashion impact went deeper than just changing what men wore. He changed what clothes could mean psychologically. Before Dean, men's fashion was about conformity and status. You dressed to show your place in the hierarchy. Your clothing announced your job, your social class, your aspirations to fit in. Fashion was armor that helped you disappear into acceptable masculinity. Dean flipped this completely. His fashion was about revelation, not concealment. The tight t-shirt revealed his body. The worn jeans revealed his authenticity. The leather jacket revealed his need for protection in a hostile world. Dean dressed to show his interior life, to make his emotional reality visible. This was revolutionary for masculinity. The 1950s demanded that men hide their feelings, suppress their vulnerability, present a stoic face to the world. Dean's fashion said, "I'm hurt, I'm angry, I'm confused, and I'm going to dress in a way that shows all of that." The slouch revealed exhaustion. The hands in pockets revealed defensive anxiety. The turned-up collar revealed the need to hide, while simultaneously being visible. Young men who adopted Dean's style weren't just copying his clothes. They were copying his permission to feel, to hurt, to be complicated. The fashion became a language for expressing emotions that 1950s culture otherwise forbade men from showing. This is why Dean's influence outlasted every other style icon of his era. He wasn't selling a look. He was selling emotional freedom. Every generation of young men facing pressure to conform, to harden, to hide their feelings discovered Dean's image and found permission to be themselves. Walk through any city today and count how many men are wearing Dean's uniform. T-shirt or simple shirt, jeans, maybe a leather or denim jacket. The proportions might have changed. Jeans are skinnier or looser depending on the current trend. Jackets are more or less fitted. But the basic components remain identical. Every man who throws on jeans and a t-shirt thinking it's the simplest, most neutral outfit is actually participating in Dean's revolution. What feels effortless now required someone to break the rules first. Dean made casual clothing acceptable. He made simple dressing cool. He made authenticity more attractive than aspiration. The red jacket still appears too. Every few years, some celebrity or designer rediscovers the bold colored jacket as a statement piece. Bright reds, electric blues, vivid yellows. All descendants of Dean's red windbreaker, all serving the same purpose. Visible rebellion, refusal to blend in, color as emotion. Even the way men pose for photographs, the slouch, the hands in pockets, the studied nonchalance, comes directly from Dean. He created a physical vocabulary for looking cool. And that vocabulary is now so embedded in culture that most people don't even realize they're quoting him. James Dean's fashion revolution succeeded where others failed because it solved a fundamental problem. How do you express individuality in a mass-produced world? The 1950s was the first era of true mass production. Everyone wore the same factory-made clothes, drove similar cars, lived in identical suburban houses. Individuality was supposed to come from minor variations within acceptable parameters. Maybe you chose a gray suit instead of a black one. Maybe your tie had a slightly different pattern. Dean rejected this entirely. He showed that you could dress simply, even in mass-produced items like Levi's jeans and Hanes t-shirts, and still express radical individuality through how you wore them, what you combined them with, what they revealed about your inner life. This made Dean's style infinitely reproducible, but impossible to truly copy. Anyone could buy jeans and a t-shirt. But Dean's slouch, his vulnerability, his specific way of inhabiting his clothes, that was his alone. Every generation tries to copy Dean and creates their own version instead. That's the genius of it. Dean also won because his fashion matched his philosophy. He preached emotional honesty, rejection of phoniness, the importance of being true to yourself. His clothes embodied those values. You can't fake authenticity in a worn-in leather jacket the way you can in an expensive suit. Dean's fashion demanded that you actually live the life his clothes suggested. James Dean died at 24 with so much left unexplored. We don't know how his style would have evolved as he aged. Would he have eventually put on a suit? Would he have pushed even further into androgynous fashion? Would he have become a designer himself, formalizing the aesthetic he created instinctively? These questions haunt fashion historians because Dean's truncated career means we only got the opening chapters of his fashion story. Everything after is speculation and influence. But maybe that's why his impact remains so powerful. Dean never had to compromise, never had to age out of his own aesthetic, never had to watch his rebellion become mainstream and boring. He exists forever at the exact moment when his fashion revolution was beginning. When the red jacket was still shocking, when t-shirts were still transgressive. Every red jacket is a ghost of that moment. Every young man in jeans and a t-shirt is channeling Dean's refusal to conform. The revolution he started at 24 continues 70 years later because he never stopped revolutionizing. Death froze him in perfect rebellion. James Dean wore a red jacket in a movie and changed how half the world dresses. That sentence seems impossible, but it's simply true. One piece of clothing worn by one actor in one film shifted the entire trajectory of menswear from conformity to self-expression. The red jacket hangs in a Warner Brothers archive now, faded and fragile, protected behind glass. But its influence is everywhere. In the leather jacket slung over a subway seat. In the white t-shirt at the grocery store. In the worn jeans at the coffee shop. In every man who ever chose comfort over conformity, authenticity over aspiration, being himself over being what he's supposed to be. Dean proved that fashion could be rebellion. That simple clothes could carry complex meanings. That looking effortless required enormous effort. That being true to yourself was the most radical choice you could make. The red jacket was never just a jacket. It was a declaration. I exist. I feel. I refuse to disappear. 70 years later, young men are still putting on jeans and t-shirts and making the same declaration. James Dean invented modern menswear by proving that the most revolutionary thing you can wear is yourself. That red jacket changed everything, and we're all still wearing its legacy. James Dean lived only 24 years, but those years were filled with stories the world never heard. Stories of love, pain, rebellion, dreams that died too soon. This channel exists to tell those stories, to remember not just the icon, but the man. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe, because James Dean's story isn't over. Not yet.